So as we dive more into the leadership discussion, we will continue with a panel of distinguished leaders in the field. I want to welcome and give the floor to Dr. Tom Fleming, Director of the Tom Fleming Creative Consultancy and an expert on creative economy, cultural and arts policy, who will introduce his guests in the panel. Tom, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be with you today. That session, I think, was a fascinating introduction to the challenges, but also perhaps some of the opportunities that lie ahead for museums. It was, I think, a provocation for us to almost reframe what we mean by leadership and reimagine the role of a museum as a source for a more equitable future. And it reminded me of some of the discussions we're seeing more broadly in a COVID or a post-COVID landscape. The mayor of Milan, for example, Giuseppe Sala, says that we need to rethink the rhythms of the city. The authorist and futurist Alvin Toffler suggests that the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. Lonnie G. Bunch III, the Secretary of the Smithsonian Institution, said, "This is a new day. The pandemic will not go away like a light switch. Learn from the past and respect it. Remember our losses and who we are, and embrace the opportunity to do the work." And somebody said to me the other day, and I can't remember who said it, he said, you know, we're all startups now. Whether you're a national museum or a small local museum, we all have to think like a startup. We have to antagonize our role. We have to genuinely get under the skin of what the value proposition is for a museum in society as we move forward. And this requires a new type of leadership, a rethink ultimately. And this session is around exploring what that rethink might involve. I have three esteemed panelists to introduce to you, who are each going to respond to some overarching questions and considerations around the role of museums and the leadership role that they can play. We have Nicholas Yatromanolakis, the General Secretary. This is the best job title, by the way, I've seen for some time. The General Secretary for Contemporary Culture in the Ministry of Culture and Sports of the Hellenic Republic. We have the Basil and Elise Goulandris Foundation. And we have Kassandra Marinopoulou, who's the President and CEO of the Museum of Cycladic Art in Athens. So we have some collective knowledge here and some really distinctive perspectives as well to explore in terms of the leadership role that museums can have going forward. So we are all startups now. And Nicholas, I just want to turn to you to respond and perhaps give a bigger picture overview of the role that culture has in society as we move, hopefully, into a post-COVID landscape. And Elizabeth said that the shift starts at the top, so which is an interesting provocation for somebody working in a government. So Nicholas, I would just like to hear from you really in terms of your instinctive perspective around where the cultural sector needs to go now to ensure that it can play a strong strategic leadership role that has an impact for the wider society. Nicholas, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Tom, and thank you to the Banach Museum, to the US Embassy, and to the British Council for hosting this wonderful event. It might be virtual this year, but still the essence is here and very much alive. So back to your question, Tom. I think that when the pandemic struck, it was kind of like you had to think on different levels and for different reasons and different points of time. So you had to have, first of all, a short-term and immediate response, and then you had to also start to think about the future. So I've actually prepared just a couple of slides to help through this thinking. So if we could put them on, that would be great. If not, yeah, thank you. So the whole idea when this crisis, this health crisis erupted, you know, first of all, you put your crisis management hat on and you try to think, okay, what is going on and what we're going to do. First of all, in terms of health and safety, both, you know, for your team or for, you know, and the audience, and in our case, in my case, for the public and for the entire country in terms of cultural institutions. And then you also have other questions to respond to. So it's like, how is this affecting my model? How is this going to affect my, financials? And this goes back to things that also Elizabeth Mary touched upon, that has to do with how your finances are structured and how you're building this. And the third one is, I'm a museum, for example, or I'm a cultural institution, or I'm the Ministry of Culture, and I'm kind of like overseeing culture in a country. How am I going to fulfill my mission? How I'm going to accomplish this in these circumstances? So you start from just being scrambling and trying to be barely functional, to say, okay, I have to figure out different ways of operating, going to even becoming inspirational. And we've seen, I think, several institutions, both in Greece and abroad, that have managed to go through this and come up with innovative ideas on how to present, to be present, and to present new kind of like models of operating. I can give you even examples from Greece, just very quick ones. For example, the Momus Museum, the Thessaloniki Modern Art Museum, we asked them, actually, we give them extra funding to all of our cultural institutions in Greece, the state-owned, and we said, just take this money to commission new work during the pandemic. So what they did was they commissioned a photograph project that has to do with the pandemic, and they were supposed to launch it actually now, but again, because of the second wave of the lockdown, it's going to be launched a bit further down the road. Or the Thessaloniki Documentary Institute Film Festival, they commissioned films on the pandemic, during the pandemic. Or for the first time, we had the opportunity to host a live streaming event from the Theater of Epidaurus with a live ancient Greek drama for the world to see. So still, we figured out ways of doing this. But then, and if we can go to the second slide, we have to think of the future. And the key thing about the future is, first of all, you have to kind of like do damage control and say, okay, where am I now? Am I okay? Am I surviving this? How am I going to reopen? And then you start asking more deep questions that have to do with things like, how has this affected my, systemically the institution that I represent? And then things like, can I go back to where we were? Can we go back to where we were? And more importantly, in my opinion, do we want to go back to where we went, to where we were? And I think this is a very intrinsic and very key question when we talk about the leadership of cultural institutions, because as you said, this is not like a switch that you're going to, flip on and off. And that means that essentially we cannot go back to exactly where we were. And this is not necessarily a bad thing, or it is a bad thing and a good thing, or let's find, the silver lining so that it's not such a bad thing. There are things we can do, but we need to prepare. And this is where the discussion starts to become more interesting. How can you prepare? In our case, and I'll conclude my first, statement with this, is that in our case, in the case of the Greek Ministry of Culture and the Secretariat General for Contemporary Culture, it has to do with dealing with systemic and fundamental issues that pre-existed, but the COVID pandemic kind of brought up to the surface. So for example, things that have to do with labor issues, tax issues, undeclared work, or the protection of intellectual property. As we go to a more digital environment, this becomes even more important. And also another thing is skill building and capacity building. Are people, our institutions prepared for this new wave of things that is going to happen? Are they prepared to discuss and discover new business models? So this is what I think is the future ahead, together with other things that we need to take care of, like access to funding. Usually the people that have the access to money, or the banks or the financial institutions, and the cultural industry, they're kind of like lost in translation. So we hope to be almost like a mediator and a link that we can create this new opportunity for them to work together. And also things like access. How you continue and you maintain the access that public has to culture. and how even can you even expand it from what it was, and how can you diversify it from what it was? And the last thing is how this affects things like becoming resilient for the future crisis, and how your sustainability is impacted overall.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. And I'll come back to you in a moment, if I may, with a question around the role for government in setting the scene there and in incentivising change and reform in the cultural sector, and obviously specifically for museums. But I'll give you some time to think about the answer to that provocation.
Sure.
But before that, I'd like to introduce Fleurette Karadontis, and just to initiate a discussion really around you in terms of your museum, and what are you learning through this difficult time? How are you navigating through change? And what does that mean in terms of a leadership role, or a perceived leadership role around engagement, audience development, and other things that may be striking you as significant at this moment?
Good afternoon to everyone. And thank you for giving me a chance to speak a little bit. Mr. Yatromanolakis gave us the macro view of museums, but what we're living through is the micro view. We are, as you know, a very small museum, and literally we are a startup. I mean, we opened last year, October 2nd, and the COVID crisis found us 6 months later and caught us on the hop as everybody else. Now, for us, we believe that there's a quote by Lao Tzu, who founded Taoism, and it says that a leader is best when people barely know he exists. When his work is done, his aims fulfilled, they will say, we did it ourselves. And I think that's very important. Museums have to be psychological leaders, quiet leaders. Museums should be inspiring and motivating, both within the museum, our employees, and outside in the community. Let's not forget that art therapy has been prescribed more and more now as a psychological calming agent for people, whether they're going through the stress of the COVID crisis or anything else. So as a safe and calm environment for everyone, museum can target the various ages and the various groups that are more at risk without being overtly in your face leaders. And this, what we've tried to do very clearly is, at the moment, use all digital tools that are available to us to be able to reach as many people as possible, especially the most vulnerable, in terms that as quickly as we could, within 5 days, we made free the access of 180 works through our website in 2 languages. This would have been the audio guides that people would use to go through to have a guided visit. And it was very exciting because within 1 week, we actually had almost 16,500 visits. And for us, that was very, very important because it showed how much people really are interested to see something different, to escape from a reality that's inside their homes. Also, in order to keep the younger audiences engaged, we launched an open call, which was, we asked all children ages up to age 15 to create an artwork being inspired by our collection that they could see online and send it to us, and we would put it up in a special platform. This worked so well that we decided after COVID to exhibit it in our temporary exhibition space because there were so many works, and some of them were so astounding that it actually happened that our first temporary exhibition was of the children who we consider are one of our most important audiences. We're looking at the future here. And if they don't feel free to express themselves in a museum situation, then they won't feel comfortable going to a museum later on in life. And it's been shown in a lot of museums in the UK, for example, that a huge percentage of people who visit the museum on the weekend are actually families whose children have gone to the museum as a school visit during the week, and they drag the families. So we think that's wonderful. Of course, we accelerated the launch of our e-shop, which was going to go online anyway, but we just did that as fast as we could. And we also launched the application as a sort of a COVID measure. We were going to do it anyway, but we accelerated that as well. This is a downloadable application, free application that you can download on any phone. And it has the same and a little bit of augmented the information of our audio guides, so that people don't have to, when they finally come back to the museum, they don't have to touch an audio guide, put it close to their face that somebody's used before. We also live streamed one of our jazz concerts that we had been having every Friday. We live streamed that, and we tried to replicate some of the successful activities online that we've been having live in the museum. For example, our 65 plus program, which is a program that's based on something called the Thallo program that they have for people over 65 years old, some of them with very light cognitive problems, and they bring people closer to the artwork through personal engagement with an artwork. And even online, this has worked tremendously well. The programs sold out the moment, within a day of becoming available. And of course, our community outreach at the moment, we invest very heavily in our community involvement. I don't know whether you know, Mr. Yatromanolakis knows that we thought it very important. We inaugurated the museum by the local school. One class of the local school that's just up the road from us were the first ones to go into the museum. And this, we wanted to send it was a message that everybody is important to us, and the museum is for everyone, no matter how young, how old, their level of knowledge of art, it doesn't make a difference. And also we've had, because maybe we're very lucky in that we live in a very artistic neighborhood, we have a lot of collaborations with the neighborhood, from the cafe that we asked a very successful neighborhood cafe here to run, to a lot of designers who live in the area. They collaborate on projects for the museum shop.
Right.
Our shop is something that we didn't go the easy way. Everything in our shop was created for the museum. You can't find it anywhere else, it's just us. And a lot of it was created by Pangrati, people who live here. So it's been a big challenge, obviously. We went from having 2,500 visitors a day to closed doors. But we do what we can. I think everybody, we try to pull our own weight and do what we can, really.
Thank you so much for that. And often people talk about COVID as being this, obviously it's a huge disruptor, but it is also this accelerator of things that were already underway. And it feels like lots of museums have used this as an opportunity to not just to look at what you can protect, but also to look at what you can seed and grow, but also to accelerate and push through. Whilst bearing in mind that that's an incredibly challenging context. So I'd just like to ask us, Mrs. Marinopoulou, please, if I could, you appreciate the Greek surnames are hard for me to get around my English tongue quite as easy as yourselves. I'd like to hear from you in terms of how you've been navigating through this process of change as well in your museum, and perhaps some considerations in terms of what that might mean for a new look museum going forward.
All right. For a museum going forward, today it has to be digital. And there were quite a few steps we did, starting by wanting to help the community during the beginning of the COVID crisis, where we thought of, we wanted to do something for the schools. So we went to the Ministry of Education and asked them if they would like us to help in supporting their online school learning by offering tablets, which was one of the new projects because schools didn't have tablets. So we asked our members if they would like for the renewal to give 20% of the renewal to supporting tablets for the schools. And this gave the friends' reaction was overwhelming, and it gave immediately giving back to community from the Friends of the Museum. So that was a combination of forward digital going forward to a community showing the community how to proceed. Now, thanks to Mr. Yatromanolakis and the Ministry of Education, we got a grant for preparing an online exhibition platform where it will be a narrative and something very new, not very strictly to show around in a digital way exactly how the exhibition is, but a more general narrative that would have video, online tours, and high resolution images and all this. But here I want to mention the following. We cannot, and here all the museums have to work together. We cannot go on offering this for free. We have to train the audience because for many years we have been giving this for free. And how to do it, we have thought of a few ways. We have to give the first and most simple information that we used to give up to now for free. So we can have an introduction of the exhibition, for example, a summary, and a few representative works from the exhibition. But then, if we want to go deeper, if we want to give a full online tour from the curator, or if we want to offer from the catalogs, articles from the curators, or from invited professors from universities, that would have to be a paid content. So if all museums are slowly aligned, we can get some funding for the cost of all this digital improvement, and at the same time train the public, the ones who want just a quick look at the exhibition. They can do it this way. The ones who will want to pay it will be a smaller ticket than the physical ticket. And this in the future, I think will give a lot of funding to the museum because if it's well done and high quality, it will attract people from all over the world for all museums. And another way we have thought is to share traveling exhibitions. to share digital exhibition. We used to have them traveling, but now we can, once everybody is digitally more improved, we can even share digital exhibitions. So here come in partnerships as well. Go ahead.
No, please.
If you want to ask me.
Well, I was just going to ask you, and I think you've started to answer that question. One of the questions we have from the audience is, in terms of the digital development that you've done, what are the big things you've learned, and what are you keeping or likely to keep after the pandemic? And I think you slightly answered that in terms of, well, it depends on ability to pay or to invest or to be able to fund the digital infrastructure. But I just wonder whether it's helped you to rethink about how you get that balance between the digital and obviously the physical, that hybrid reality as we move into the future.
Of course, there will always be the physical visitor, and you can never substitute being in front of a work of art. But there is the appearance of the digital visitor, the digital tourist that is now between 20 and 35 years old, who is quite happy and comfortable to visit museums and many museums online. And we have to cater to him as well, because we have to go forward and we have to cater for the new generation. At the same time, we have to think also that in some way, the environment will profit from all this, because there will be less traveling eventually, especially for business meetings, but also more efficient management because of the digital that will never go back where it was before. But also because if the exhibitions will become so digitally entertaining and well done, maybe they won't have to travel so much and be so expensive, because as we know, museums need funding. And the big problem is, especially after the COVID era, is the difficulty to get the funds. So the combination of a monetized digital content and a traveling exhibition maybe will help us create content and move along and do our community programs and do what we have to do in a better way.
Okay, thank you. And that builds a lovely bridge back to Nicholas as well, I think, because it raises a question, obviously, around the role of the state in a public-private partnership context, and the role that museums, whether they're private sector driven or public sector driven, have in terms of diversifying income streams, developing new business models. And it's also a question around how that the state, working in partnership with museums of all kinds, can start to create a new strategic narrative for museums where they are more open, inclusive, embedded, hybrid in terms of digital and physical. So it's scene setting, really. It goes back to the question I asked you, Nicholas, to consider a few minutes ago. How can they work in partnership to create this new strategic leadership narrative for museums?
Thank you. I think actually there are multiple ways we can achieve that, and that we have already been designing to achieve that. So first of all, I think you need to kind of like beef up, if I may, the capacity of cultural institutions. So how do you do that? So one thing is, you know, as we said before, it has to do with capacity building and skill building of both people and organizations. So we've actually just, we passed a bill in July, creating this new institution called Acropole, which is actually going to be focusing on things like the skill building and capacity building of cultural professionals, things like leadership and the role of leaders in the cultural industry. So it's going to be a bit different from other state-owned and state-operated cultural institutions. in the sense that, I mean, it will have an exhibition space and it will have such other, events that we're going to be doing that are going to be open to the public, but it's also going to be focusing to the cultural community itself. So one tool that we are expecting to actually utilize to its full extent is Acropole. Another thing is that until now, I mean, a main instrument that the government has, to support not just the state-owned museums, but the private museums, but also the private cultural institutions, is the having open calls and having funding programs and funding projects. And this is something that pretty much every government does. We're restructuring this project. We started last year, 2019, pre-COVID, which was our first year in office, and then now we're going to do that even we're going to take it even further. One thing that we did was we launched just a few weeks after the pandemic erupted this first call. It was the first time that the ministry launched such a call. It was a digital culture call, and it was just for the creation and the support of digital projects. And it was, let's say, also interdisciplinary and cross-cultural and cross-disciplinary. But I think that as we move forward, we will see even more targeted projects and like this. And also, if I can touch upon a bit on the digital that I mentioned, and also Mrs. Marinopoulou and Mrs. Karadontis touched upon. Here, we need to improve the digital products that cultural institutions, including museums, offer. The first response or the immediate response is naturally to just try to convert or even just record what was happening at the physical space and just tape it to have it digital. So it will be a play, and then we'll have the televised version of that play, or it will have a virtual tour of a gallery or a museum. But I think we have to think of more native digital projects and products that we can offer to the public. And this, even when this crisis kind of like fades away, this will remain and their value will still be there. They can be valuable tools, educational tools for kids. They can be valuable tools for people that are outside, the area where a museum is based. I mean, I think that, it can tie different loose ends that exist out there. Also, we're trying to create new business models and to provide to museums and other institutions leads, let's say new business leads, so that this could add to their revenue streams. And I'll explain what I mean. As you probably know, the EU has established this Resilience and Recovery Fund, the RRF, for, because of COVID. And it's actually, we as contemporary culture, we have actually asked for a lot of money just for the industry. And we are including very innovative things in there. So Ms. Karadontis will be happy to know that we're trying, for example, just to give you an example, to institutionalize in Greece the art prescription. So health professionals will be able to prescribe art as part of the therapy that they would recommend to a patient. And this is something we're already discussing with the Ministry of Health, and we are doing, and it's something we have submitted to the European Union as a proposal. That means that museums soon, hopefully, if this passes, will be called or offered, depends how you see it, opportunities to actually expand their business model and their role, and take on, by designing programs with health experts to, have different revenue streams, but even revisit their own role in the community. Another example that is how you create cultural-centric economies. This goes mostly to the periphery, but even in Athens, you can do it at a neighborhood scale, as Ms. Karadontis explained that they're doing in the Pagrati neighborhood in Athens. But imagine that even stronger in local areas. And this also happens simultaneously with another initiative that we took, which is that we are now slowly yet steadily and very surely incorporating the creative industries and the creative economy in what we define as cultural, contemporary culture, which means that we will be encouraging the collaboration, let's say, of designers and people that work in the craft industry with professionals from other, from museums and other cultural institutions. Another thing is that we are, Ms. Marinopoulou touched upon the whole thing of, should we give things out for free? Should we give things with a price? And this is something very, very important. We as a state, obviously, we have to have our own policy, and we can be a bit more flexible in that, but we do realize that, private institutions cannot and should not be expected to do everything for free, because this hits their business model and it actually jeopardizes their sustainability. And the other thing is, and if I may, that it touches upon a bigger issue that we have discovered here, and that has to do with how seriously the cultural industry is being taken by people from other industries as a legitimate sector of the economy, and a sector that can export things, that can create jobs, that can, generate wealth, and also improve the well-being of communities because of all that. And this does not mean that we intend to limit the access of the public to culture. These things are not like mutually exclusive. It's just that this is an industry, and it's not a bad word. It's actually a great word, because that means that it can have an impact, and we should try to improve that. And that's what we're doing.
Thank you, Nicholas. And in the background, we have so many questions, but we're already hanging on to the digital cliff by our fingernails here in terms of timing. This has raised so many really important things that we need to ingest and digest, which are critical for thinking about the role that museums have in the future. And Elizabeth Merritt said earlier on that they're trusted, or more trusted, institutions, and I think that's critical in terms of rebuilding a social contract, and thus rebuilding cohesion and trust within society as a whole. I just want to finish, if I may, leave the floor to our two museum professionals in this panel, just to very briefly, if you may, just reflect on what next. If it's just one thing that you feel we, as a museum sector, not your museum individually, as a museum sector, we need to really, really think about going forward, and then we can use that to close this session. So if perhaps Fleurette, you could go first, and then Kassandra, you could finish.
What next? I'm not sure, simply because of the uncertainties of the COVID presence in our lives. It's absolutely certain that museums can't just be digital tools. For us, we're a visual arts museum, and the artwork is a completely different thing when it comes to a physical visit or whether it's a digital visit. It's a completely different thing. So certainly the physical presence in museums has got to be paramount. On the other hand, I think, for example, e-learning, the presence of museums in people's lives, in schools, in school visits, has got to be encouraged. At the moment, there's a pilot project going on, started by Unisystems, which is a technical company that tries to bring together museums, and I think there are a lot of museums who've signed on to this, with schools, and have a visit, a virtual visit, but with a one-on-one museum professional with the classroom. At the moment, it's a one-on-one, one classroom, one museum, but we're hoping in the future to have it one-to-many.
Excellent, thank you.
Sorry?
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I'm going to have to be. The digital doesn't help us in terms of politeness, does it? We have to go like this. We are running at 8 o'clock. But that's a really important point, and many people have actually been asking questions around how we build digital literacy, or how do we bridge the digital divide? And obviously, starting in the classroom is a really important part of that strategy in terms of that whole question around leadership through digital. Thank you for that, Fleurette. Kassandra, if I could just ask you to reflect just very briefly, please, on the what next for the sector.
For me, we have to work on helping communities. We have to work on, I'll give you an example, very close to Fleurette's was that we had 10 schools a day, and now we are visiting schools online with live streaming. We're working on this. I think we are working on a virtual reality for seniors. So we have to go, as you said, it's not only about content, it's not only about monetizing content, but we have to use our digital resources and advances to go and help out the community. And we're very happy that the state, as Mr. Yatromanolakis said, is now going to help not only the state museums, but the private museums, because endowments over the COVID area has really suffered. Even though boards and sponsors have been more flexible. But that is our mission, apart from education, helping in more ways the communities.
Excellent. Thank you so much to our three esteemed panelists. This has been an excellent provocation, and I'm sure that we could, if given the opportunity, talk about this for today and many days to come. But there is a conference to get on with. There are other things waiting in the wings. Thank you so much once again. And if I may use this opportunity to thank all of the audience for your many questions. I didn't have the chance to integrate them as much into the discussion because the discussion was so fruitful already. If I could pass back then to our hosts at CoMuseum. Thank you once again, everybody.